Hey gang, we are in Michigan today. We're right near Flint, Michigan in this area. This is Davison. Might be Richfield, I'm not sure of the town. It says on Find a Grave Davison, but anyway, we're at the Richfield Union Cemetery. Very small cemetery, very old cemetery. And it's going to be a two-part story today. The ghouls and the grave robbing we're getting back to, and there's just a horrendous story here in this area. We're focused on the story of the McNamee family. It was a family of grave robbers, son being the doctor and the mother, the father, the sister. I think it was more the father, sister, and maybe others. It was a gang. We're going to visit the grave of one of the two victims right in this area, and then we're going to go to another cemetery after this to tell two parts to the story. We've got some newspaper articles. Deb, shout out to Deb. We've done a lot of research here. These are pretty much forgotten, untold stories from the archives. So let's take a walk, and I'm going to tell you the story of what happened here with this McNamee family. And they were something else. And I'm going to read to you. It's really interesting, again, the way the newspapers and the terminology that they used were, it's just interesting to hear it in those words. And you start out with the headlines. There's always those descending headlines, and in this case it says, "Thrice horrible. Flint, Michigan furnishes the world a blood-curdling sensation. The graveyard of all that region robbed of their dead to feed Ann Arbor scalpels." And in other words, when they say scalpels, they're talking about the medical colleges, of course, the anatomists who want the bodies. Goes on in the headlines, the descending headlines, "A family of several persons named McNamee, the jackals, who perpetrated the outrages. The chief ghoul saves himself by flight and intense excitement and threats of vengeance." So the article really starts, it says, "A story which is so hideous and frightful in its detail as almost to be beyond belief has come to light in the town of Flint, Michigan. There have been efforts on all sides to suppress the horrible tale, and up to this time the public has been kept somewhat in the dark as to the true facts which are about to be narrated. Such a story as told disgraces the name of humanity and the traits of character revealed as such as devils themselves must be horrified to see exhibited. It appears that up to within a month back, there has been living about 3 miles from town in question a family by the name of McNamee, consisting of a father, an old man, 50 or 60 years, named Joseph McNamee, and a son, 20 years old, also named Joseph, and another son called Dr. W.J. McNamee, the latter supposed to be a student at Ann Arbor University, and a daughter whose name is not given. Now, this family of 5 have not been held in good repute for many years past, the father having been arrested during the war for running an illicit distillery. And as none of them are known to have done any work since, and yet lived in good shape and had plenty of money, suspicion attached to them. And they were shunned by their neighbors and generally considered to be bad characters. Suspicions, however, assumed no definite shape until a short time ago. Stories began to float around to the effects that graves have been robbed. At the dead of night, portions of bodies and shrouds have been found in different places. Tombs were opened and found to be despoiled of their sacred ashes. The McNamees, father and son, had been seen at suspicious hours in the proximity of the graveyard. And suddenly it became clear that the whole family had existed for years by the horrible, shocking, remorseless crime of body snatching. They had the contract to supply the medical school of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Supplied these subjects, these bodies, and in the prosecution of their ghoulish trade, they spared no cemeteries in the surrounding counties and had no care of the feelings of any father, mother, or daughter. Scarcely was a grave and its still untainted occupant in his last quiet sleep before these vampires were hovering over the damp lay and snatching the body from its damp, peaceful rest. Old, respected citizens, young girls and little children, young men in the prime of their years, and grandmothers in the white hair were taken from abode where their souring friends had laid them down, were borne to the houses of this company of monsters, hastily thrown into the oat bins in the stable and left there until opportunity offered to ship them off. Yes. So that is how we open the article, the story here. And again, we are walking to the grave of one of the victims. And it's just, another area here where there were no laws. There were laws in Illinois, there were laws in some of the states. You didn't hear about this from the colleges, but in Michigan, Ohio, I think, of course, Indiana, and some of the other states, they had no laws. So this was going on. It was rampant. Well, the headline that is associated with this place here at Richfield Union Cemetery. 2 bodies of recent death snatched. These were men by the name of Soper and Allen, and their friends having instituted a search. Their mutilated remains were found at the same place, in the little repository at Ann Arbor College. When these facts were ascertained, people all around the neighborhood began to institute the searches that revealed the fact that there was scarcely an unrobbed grave in the cemetery. A little girl had a year before picked up in the graveyard a bit of illusion, such as had been worn upon the body of a Mrs. Mary Ingraham, a lady of high culture who had died of consumption. It was noticed at the time, but thought to be a mere coincidence, and now, when these stories were reported, was remembered. The grave was opened and found to be empty. And strange to say, it was then discovered that the McNamee girl, the daughter, had worn the black silk dress in which the body had been robed, and had other garments that had made up a fine wardrobe pilfered from the dead. McNamee had been seen the day of the funeral peering over the fence and watching the operations of the funeral cortege. Still another case of the man living down the river just a few miles. He, having lost his wife, he resolved to keep watch over her. And what happened? He surprised the human hyenas coming over to the grave. Well, he raised his shotgun and he pulled the trigger. But the interposition or the foul fiend caused the cap to snap uselessly, and the wretches fled. A dozen stories are told. A dozen stories, but these are enough to sicken the heart and confirm the worst suspicions. And that ends the first part of the article. So we are walking to the Soper grave, which is right over here. This is where it happened, and I want you to imagine that, you know, when these bodies, the corpses were laid to rest in their wooden coffins, the ground was obviously dug up, disturbed, and easily penetrated by the spades. And we talked about how they worked, how they'd bring the tarp and the lantern, and they would put that dirt on the tarp so they could put it back after they stole the body. So there would be no dirt in the grass or sign. And the family would come to pay respects, like right here. But little did they know, their loved one was gone. So here is the stone of Stephen Soper, who died October 1871. He was, looks like it says here, 52 years. Let's take a closer look. Got a flashlight. Yes, 1871. October 1871. Age 52 years. And it looks like there is a prayer of some sort. There it is. That looks to be the original stone. Just imagine. He is here, but his body was mutilated, found at the college. And they put him back. All right. So we are now going to go to our next destination to tell the rest of the story, and it gets more gruesome for what the McNamee family here in the Flint area, they hit all these cemeteries. So rest in peace. Let's go. We are at the public vault here now at Evergreen Cemetery. And we're about 15 minutes away from the other cemetery, Richfield Union. Yeah, this is Flint. We are in Flint. And now we're going to walk to the grave of the family. The young son was stolen, and you're going to hear the story how this is what broke the whole case apart. Is the McNamees were pretty much caught red-handed on this particular case. And just imagine the parents, the horrible feeling that they had and what they had to endure when you hear this story. It's pretty rough. So, without any further ado, we'll get back to the newspaper. So what they said was, and I'll be quoting, "Of the business of the McNamees was made a farmer named Goodrich, living in the neighborhood. One night, not long since he had been to attend a Grange meeting and was detained until midnight, on his way home, he had to pass what is known as the old graveyard in Flint." And by the way, this is the old graveyard, was the old graveyard, is under a different name. It was well 1 o'clock when he reached it. Just before arriving there, he was surprised to see a team coming towards him, and upon drawing near, discovered that there were 4 occupants. These were the McNamees, the elder sitting on one side of the seat, Joe, the younger boy, driving, and the girl reclining in the back part of the wagon. And a 4th figure was sitting between the young and old man in that wagon seat up front. This latter being the man in the middle, wore a black hat and clothes, and he did not speak in response to the inquiry of Goodrich. No wonder, for it was the dead body of a young man named Wilbur Hill, 18 years of age, who had been buried that very day in the old cemetery right here. That's right. Goodrich, he communicated his discovery to the neighbors, and the grave was open, and the body was found to be gone. Wilbur's body was gone. The matter was taken up by the father of the youth, Bryant Hill. He made investigation and found the body of his son at Ann Arbor. Why would it be in Ann Arbor? I interject. Well, that's where the medical college was. That is where the bodies were being taken by the grave robbers for money. Subsequently, an attack was made upon him in the newspaper. It was asserted with the intention of crushing him being McNamee, and hushing up the story, to which he replies in the following communication, which gives some further facts. And those further facts I'm going to relay to you. This is by the father, Bryant. My son Wilbur was 17 years and 8 months old. He died and was buried in Wigville Cemetery. That is what this was called at that time, after the old graveyard. They had different names for it, but it is here. In the olden days, it was on the 28th day of October. I reside 12 miles from that burying ground. I was sent word the next day by Mr. Milo Goodrich of Burton. Of course, Milo was the farmer in the carriage who confronted the McNamees, to look at my son's grave, as he met the McNamees the previous night with shovels in their wagon coming from the cemetery. The McNamee family has long been suspected of body snatching from the clothing of the dead being recognized on them, and they're having plenty of money without seeing to work. I've got Mr. Robert Day, I've got Hiram and John Clapsaddle to accompany me to my boy's grave, which had not any appearance of being disturbed. But as my wife felt so badly about it, I determined to satisfy her by getting some of his hair, and I proceeded to dig. I found the coffin split in 3 pieces and the body gone. The body of my son was gone. I got Officer Kriego and a search warrant, and we searched the McNamee's house, and it is there where we found my dead boy's pants and vest, those that were buried on him the day before. Officer Kriego and myself then went to Ann Arbor College and were shown through the dead house by Dr. Frothingham, who said kindly he did not want to hurt my feelings, but if I would go home, he would try and find the body of my son, and send it here to Flint in good shape. On Saturday, I got a dispatch. It was from him that they had found it, quote unquote, and I would get it on Monday by express. I had another telegram from him saying that the body could not be shipped until 4 o'clock on Monday p.m., and the body came on Tuesday. My son was all discolored from being in lye, I suppose. And he closes with that. Good grief. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the mother, the father, the body in lye and some vat? So he did, it was like, it was shipped here, and they brought him back here. Of course, he was reinterred. And that's where we are walking towards. The article, other parts of it, as we continue the story, this associated story, at the Hill discovery, the excitement in Niles became intense, and the elder McNamee was at once arrested and begged for a double file of officers to protect him from violence. He is now in jail at Niles. Dr. William J. McNamee, who is in charge of the dead house, Ann Arbor, has fled. And that's what they would do. They got other stories. They would run away. They would just flee. And although a reward of $500 has been offered for him, he has not been taken. He sent a letter to the authorities dated White Plains, New York, November 20th, complaining that his father was in jail for the deeds he had done and condoning his crime as a medical necessity. Well, of course, there was a criminal investigation, and the old man, they were all thrown in jail, but everything was really focused on the senior. And, you know, he already had a bad reputation. He was a drunk. He was doing a lot of nefarious things. I mean, we talked before, the illicit still and all the alcohol, and he was pretty much considered a good for nothing. So there he sat in jail, bearing the brunt of what his son had recruited him to do. And he chose to do it. He chose to do it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a little conversation they had in jail that was quoted. I'm not going to talk about all of it or quote all of it, just a little bit of it. But it says, the title says, "What He Says." McNamee the elder is now in jail. He was visited by a representative of the Times and the sheriff, who held the following conversation with him. And it started with the sheriff asking him, "Have you been engaged in this business, body snatching?" And the prisoner said, "No, but I'm afraid John has," meaning the son. "I'm afraid John has." Sheriff said, "What has John been doing for 5 or 6 years?" "Studying medicine at Ann Arbor." "Does he get a living at that?" Joe said, "I don't know. I send him flour and potatoes, butter and cheese." Sheriff says, "Now look here. Look here, sir. How many boxes have you taken to Grand Blanc?" They were actually shipped by express and other points. And the conversation continues. Interestingly, this funny small talk. And then it ended, and they quote, they say, "Finally the old wretch returned no answer to this document, and the interviewers left. It was resolved by many to prosecute." So, article continues with the title, "Clever Trickery." When the relatives of the deceased persons came to this college to make inquiries, they were not allowed within. And in the case where all the excitement became intense, the bodies were all shipped hastily to Chicago and exchanged for subjects here, which were, of course, unrecognizable. And that's what they would do, guys. They would exchange the bodies. Now, I told you Chicago was against the law, but they had convicts and they had permission, and paupers, the morgue, unclaimed bodies. So they would take those bodies and they would ship them and exchange them. I mean, all of these doctors had, they had it all worked out together. And they'd actually ship them in bulk by train. It's hard to imagine. You got to get them there fast. They're not refrigerated. got to keep them fresh. So it was quite a debacle many times. But they were getting away with it, and the money was being paid. It was actually quite a lucrative business. You know, anywhere from $15 to $20 to $35 per body. Well, the people didn't stop at the door. Quote unquote, the article continues, the inquirer of the times, I mean the people, however, found his way within these walls. And I think they're talking about a certain person, maybe as an example. What he saw there was indescribable and would freeze the blood with horror to be told as it is. The dead room was presided over by the Dr. J.B. McNamee, already mentioned. Fragments of bread and cheese and odd platters and cold bits were thrown around, showing that this fiend made this his home. He made it his home. Upon a bench in one room were piled, like cordwood, from 40 to 50 corpses of all ages. There were blacks, and I'm not using the N-word they use, whites, mixed heads and feet, without even a decent consideration for how they lay. They were covered with sawdust and blankets, and their veins being filled with colored material. They were a sight horrible enough to shock the sensibilities of a vampire, quote unquote. But as it is, not enough to bring the blush of shame to the cheek, the authorities of this concern have also arranged a series of vats around the room in size about 6 feet by 8 feet, and perhaps some 10 feet wide, and they were filled with liquid brine. And in this the bodies are thrown and pickled for the time when subjects may be short. A pole with a hook on the end, like a boat hook, is used to fish the bodies out, and they are hauled out and slung upon the dissecting tables like rotten fish or dead dogs. They are then hauled out and slung upon the dissecting tables all over. Dr. McNamee, for the price of $25 to $35 a body, has been the servitor of this hell on earth and has now escaped. These are all the exposures that have been made thus far. It would seem to any that possess the feeling of a human being that there can be nothing worse to be told. But it may be that into this horrid pool at death, no one has yet had the courage to peer. No one. The doctors of the college say, with heartless hardihood, that there is no one in there but the N-word, not going to say it, and old men. But who knows? And who dares to look? So, well, what happened to McNamee? What happened to the family? Well, of course, as I said, there was a trial. They were in jail, at least the father was. And a short paragraph on that. A great deal of interest is manifested in the matter, and the courtroom is constantly thronged with the curious. About half a day was consumed impaneling a jury which is composed mostly of persons outside the city who know very little. Among the articles introduced as evidence on the part of the people are boxes in which the remains have been shipped to Ann Arbor, also clothing found at the prisoner's house, which was recognized as having been placed on bodies by many parents of the deceased. And that concludes just a little, well, I would say a good chunk of it, but some of the key stuff. So what happened? Well, in 1875, the old man was convicted. I mean, he was in really bad shape. And where was the son? Guess where he went? He fled to Ireland. He went back to his tutelage, those under the Burke and Hare, right? Maybe to Edinburgh. I don't know. But he took off. He was out of here. Here. Gone. The father faced the music. Old dad. They don't say what happened to the daughter. They don't say what her name was. But I can tell you that the parents are buried in... There's another cemetery here, and those of you that want to go look, it's Old Calvary, the other old one, and that's, I found on Find a Grave, the mother. She must have been, well, she was in on it all. But I'm telling you, Joseph Sr., he's probably there, and probably the sister, but I'll bet you they're not marked. And that is just like Wilbur here. Wilbur appears to be unmarked. Now here's Bryant, and his mom's name was Clarissa. So here are their graves, right here. Clarissa died in 1897. We don't have pictures of any of these folks. And here's Pops. Father Bryant R. Hill passed in 1915, so he lived the longest. He lived quite a long time. And just imagine the horror. Now, where is Wilbur? So, here's what I did. I went in the office, and they said he's in spot 5, and Dad is in spot 1, spot 2, and then you say, well, that's spot 3, right? But they say, no. It like skips, and he would be like over here. Like it goes 1, 2, 3. And I would have thought, well, he's in spot 3, but they say, no, he's in spot 5. And that's illegible. I went with the flashlight, I looked at these. But if he's in spot 5, he's definitely not here. And I looked at all the graves in this whole area. So, my guess is, and I may be wrong, that there may be a mistake, or it may have been on purpose for future grave robbers, but I'm guessing that Wilbur is interred, because they got him back, right? He was shipped back. He's buried right here, to the left of Dad. What a sad story. What an invasion. Can you imagine if it was your son, your daughter? People say, oh, medical science. This was necessary. Well, yeah, do it legally and do it with permission. We did find an old newspaper article that was dated, thanks Deb, April 12th, 1881, at Joseph McNamee. Of body snatching notoriety, died Tuesday, again, April 12th, 1881, same day. His death was caused by exposure and too much whiskey. So, there it is. Well, there's the story here from Flint of the McNamee family, the grave robbing family. And Wilbur's here somewhere. They got him back. I don't think he was dissected yet, so that's good. But I feel so bad for Mom and Dad here. I feel so bad what they had to live with. Well, they are reunited now, if there is a reunited place. Rest in peace all.